This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Oh, what's that? I'm still doing this? Say it ain't true. Yeah, my plan is to slowly ease back into the flow of things. Not exactly sure how that's going to pan out considering the crapshoot that's been my life for the last 4 weeks. I was just happy to have a day off to where I could sleep in for an extra hour. But I'm back. It's been a hot minute since we last touched base here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. No, the account didn't get hijacked by Chinese spies. I've been away doing work outside the state. Didn't really have the time nor the energy to continue with the wrestling reviews while I was dealing with all that. In hindsight, I'm glad I took a break. But I'm back in town for another few weeks before I have to drive back down to Charleston and help finish the work that my team already started. Since I actually have a bit of a holiday break between then and now, figured what the heck. Probably a good a time as any to jump back into the reviews. So here's basically my game plan between now and basically the end of the year. Since we already missed the entire month of December with the retro content, rather me play catch up and try to go back and binge watch all the content that I missed, I'm going to pick up with the Retro Raw review here for the next couple weeks, and then I'm going to start fresh with Retro WCW in Mid-South in January. Now, I'm still fairly busy between now and Christmas, so I'm not out of the woods yet. I also came to learn that apparently the retro content on Peacock is going away at the end of the year, even though I believe the initial plan was for that content to be available through April of next year. So they went back on their word. That also basically means I have no reason to continue paying for a Peacock subscription. But yeah, I don't have a ton of downtime between now and the end of the year, but it is enough to dip my toe back in and start bringing back portions of the retro review series in spurts. So we will continue with the Monday shows being the retro WWF reviews. The Friday shows will be our WCW and Mid-South review segments. We're ditching the world-class content going forward. I still have no intentions of ever reviewing any modern wrestling content again. I've given it plenty of thought, and there's just nothing worth my time or energy sitting through that would justify adding stuff to the channel, as opposed to reducing. Hopefully you're all on board with that. But I will say, it's good to be back here on the FSWR channel. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. If you are a returning viewer, glad to have you back. And if you're new, make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like. You can find the show on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays. Like I said, we'll get back to the Friday podcast in the new year once I dive back into WCW and Mid-South, which I can confirm that content is available on YouTube. The 1990 WCW library is available, and the 1985 Mid-South library is also available in very low resolution, but I'm okay with that. Means it's not the network version, so it's the original video library. With all that said, let's see what wonders await us on this week's Retro Raw. It's been well over a month since we recapped anything, and I couldn't even begin to tell you what the hell was going on last we left things. So this is going to be a fun blind expedition. What I can tell you is that starting the show with Marc Mero is a very poor decision. Why? Well, because he's Marc Mero. And he was never any good. Which pretty much describes the entirety of his WWF run in '96. Not good. Actually, let's be honest, his entire WWF run, period. He is still chasing the Intercontinental Championship, currently held by one Hunter Hearst Helmsley, who's actually been at the helm of some rather amusing fan backlash after he completely botched the booking of the John Cena retirement match. I haven't heard or seen heat for Hunter like that since his reign of doom as world champion in the mid-2000s. It's a beautiful thing to see. Fuck that guy. So, yeah, apparently the Marc Mero Triple H feud is still going. We reviewed the episode where Hunter beat Mero to win the IC title after Kurt Hennig turned heel and aligned with Hunter as a manager for all of approximately 2 weeks before his contract expired, and then he left to go work for the opposition. And so the rule for this particular title match is that if Hunter deliberately gets himself counted out or disqualified, then he automatically forfeits the belt to Mero. What prompted this stipulation? I have no idea. And if they explained it, I didn't care enough to pay attention. Here's the extent to what we do know. Between the time that all that stuff went down with Hunter, Mero, and Mr. Perfect over the IC belt, Mero has also started a feud with Jerry Lawler, and Goldust has seemingly turned babyface from out of the blue with zero explanation. So we get this match where Goldust and Marlena come through the crowd to watch, and apparently the company thought so little of them, couldn't even afford to give them front row seats at ringside. They had to watch from up in the nosebleeds with all the other unfortunate peons. It's an incredibly boring match with two guys sleepwalking through spots. That's the best possible way to describe what was happening. And after 8 minutes of deathly boring action, I'm not even kidding you, this is the fucking finish they came up with. Marc Mero, the idiot babyface, tries a blind corkscrew dive that he knew he was never going to connect with in the first place. Hunter casually moves to the side, and then he hits his pedigree and pins Mark clean to retain. Way to go, Marc Mero. The world's biggest dweeb. Then they played Beethoven's Ode to Joy, which is either canned music they dubbed over Hunter's original theme, or they actually used that as Hunter's theme music for a brief window, and I had zero memory of it. But anyway. Oh yeah, and Hunter cut a promo afterward basically vowing that he was going to fuck Marlena after the Royal Rumble. Yeah, Goldust was not pleased about that comment. I think this was their way of coming to terms with the fact that they had no credible babyface challengers for Hunter as the champion. So they looked around one day and said, who can we flip? How about Goldust? No reason to justify anything about it. We'll just have him do a random run-in where he comes to the aid of Marc Mero, and that'll be enough. So then immediately following that, They played an angle from a match that happened the other week between Billy and Bart Gunn. And y'all remember when I mentioned about a month ago when they were going through the whole breakup escapade between the Smoking Guns? I was like, I never recall seeing those two ever have a match together, despite the fact that they've been teasing a breakup for like 8 months. Well confirmed. They did in fact have a match. It was a random throwaway match in the middle of a Raw, which was merely done as an injury angle to write Billy off of TV. A very piss-poor injury angle, I might add, where they tried to sell it like Bart had legitimately broken Billy's neck by giving him one of those guillotine drops over the ropes, even though you could immediately tell on replay that Billy's neck came nowhere close to actually making contact with the ropes. But hey, it's blurring the lines, bro. It's a shoot, bro. It was stupid is what it was. So then we had our weekly dose of simping for Sunny, where she came out in a Santa hat doing her stripper dance for all the horny dudes in the crowd. Not that I had a problem with that or anything. It was surely more captivating than the match that followed. Rocky Maivia versus Salvatore Sincere, with Jim Cornette in Sal's corner for no fucking reason at all. And I guarantee you, if it already hasn't been asked as a drive-through question on his podcast, guarantee that Jim has no memory of ever managing Sal Sincere on Monday Night Raw. So the story here is that Sunny is trying to recruit Rocky because, as she quoted, what Sunny wants, Sunny gets. She wants to manage Rocky and show him the path to glory. You know, as a manager, not a fuck buddy. Totally professional platonic relationship there. You know, watching this match, I'd have figured Sunny would want to avoid Rocky like the plague. Fuck, this was terrible. It was really bad, dude. You know, like, I remember The Rock being pretty rough around the edges during his first couple years with the WWF. I hope this isn't one of those cases where I go back and realize that he was way worse than I remember. I mean, there were multiple moments in this match where you can just see Rocky getting lost and having no idea where he was supposed to be or what he was supposed to do. Those awkward pauses in between spots where he's just standing there with his fist in the air like, all right, help me out, dude. I don't know what's coming next. You're the ring veteran here. And look, I know it was a holiday season. Nobody wanted to fucking be there. But this was exactly like the Hunter Mero match we just talked about. These two are just moseying through spots at the pace of turtles, barely getting out of first gear. Crowd is deader than downtown Cleveland at 5 a.m. I mean, the one move that actually got the people somewhat into it was the DDT spot that Rocky gave right before his comeback. Then he won with that stupid shoulder breaker he was using as a finish during this time. God, this is death. Absolute death TV segment. And there were definitely a handful of boos from the crowd when the match was over. It wasn't die Rocky die levels of noticeable yet. But you could tell even then, this gimmick was doomed to fail. Speaking of things that were doomed to fail, putting a live mic in front of Psycho Sid. At least that was comical failure. You could get actual value out of Sid cutting promos, because you never knew what the hell you were going to get. Sometimes you were guaranteed great delivery. Other times it was poor Sid Udy bumbling over himself in very awkward demeanor. By the way, I wanted to point this out. The WWF Championship, when Sid wore that thing around his waist, it looked tiny. I was watching him come down the aisleway with that thing, and I'm like, is that the actual belt or is that a toy replica? Because it looks minuscule around Sid. And so, well, here's the extent to what they covered in this promo. Sid talked about being the most dominant force in the sport of wrestling. He talked about defeating the two greatest athletes in the WWF today in the past 30 days, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. He said that he's 6'9", over 300 pounds, and he will continue to be 6'9" and 300 pounds from every day onward. To which JR said, well, he's right about that. And that was basically it. It was the polar opposite of every modern WWE promo you get today. They were in and they were out in less than 5 minutes. The entire context of the promo was Sid's tall, he's strong, he's scary, and he's a bit nuts. Pretty much a cut and paste cereal box logo. He's tall, he's big, he's scary, and he's a bit cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And it's why we loved him. Or at least I did, growing up back in the day. We then had a segment that I am not making up. The New Rockers taking on two random AAA guys that we have never seen or heard of before. And the only reason it had any significance is because they brought in Mil Máscaras to do commentary with the Spanish announce team. And the only thing funnier than watching two Mexican luchadors work a Styles Clash match with an American tag team is watching Mexican luchadors work a Styles Clash match with an American tag team who are also really bad. Case in point, the New Rockers. From the minute they rang the bell to start this thing, Marty Jannetty and Al Snow had no idea how to fucking feed for these guys. I mean, they're out there just working a typical AAA style match with two guys that never worked that style before. Didn't know whether to whine their ass or scratch their watch. It's hilariously bad. The longer it goes, the more restless the crowd got. At one point, JR tried to mask the apathy in the room by pointing out that the reason people were not taking too kindly to the action is because both teams were heels. So it was hard for the fans to pick and choose sides. No, the reality is the match was fucking abysmal and nobody had any reason to give a shit one way or the other. So eventually the Luchadors won. We were then informed that all three of these AAA talents were going to be making appearances in the 1997 Royal Rumble match, Máscaras included. And again, this was basically just a way for them to advertise Máscaras for the pay-per-view and try to bump up some additional pay-per-view buys. I can't entirely fault them. Even though the match was utterly useless and nobody ever actually thought Mil Máscaras stood a snowball's chance in hell of winning the Rumble. On the subject of more legends making unannounced appearances, we had the return of the Honky Tonk Man here for the main event this week. And he's actually on a similar search as what we found out with Sonny earlier in the program. He's on the hunt for a new client. Someone that can play the guitar and rock and roll to the same level that Honky did once upon a time. And so, Well, apparently that led him to want to come out to do color commentary for Bret Hart versus the Fake Razor, wherein Honky basically spent the entire 10 minutes berating Bret and saying that he doesn't have what it takes to be the top guy in the WWF anymore. Now, of course, we all know who Honky ended up siding with later on. I have no clue why they decided to have him come out to do commentary for Bret versus Fake Razor. Probably as a means to break up the monotony of how boring the match was. Predictably, Bret won with a sharpshooter in a match that was only slightly more tolerable than your average Fake Razor match. Meaning that it wasn't good, but Bret still made it somewhat salvageable. Then we had Shawn Michaels doing a promo from the locker room where he acted like the world's biggest douchebag, claiming that he's going into the Royal Rumble expecting the unexpected, and win, lose, or draw, he'll accept the final outcome of him versus Sid for the title. Unlike Bret Hart, who spends every waking moment bitching and crying when things don't go his way. Now again, for those that don't know the backstory, since we didn't review the last In Your House with Sid versus Bret for the title, Shawn ended up accidentally costing Bret the match during the closing minutes after they did a bunch of overbooked run-in chicanery with Owen, Davey Boy, and I think Austin got involved at one point. I don't remember all the details to it, but I do remember Bret and Shawn getting into a fight afterward. The kayfabe fight. Not the real one they ended up having backstage later in '97 when Bret ripped out a clump of Shawn's hair. So they're setting the playing field that Shawn and Bret are still faces, but they're not exactly on good terms with one another. And again, it's all being done with the original intent of booking Shawn versus Bret for the WrestleMania match in Chicago for the title, which, as we know based on historical knowledge, doesn't pan out because Shawn has his little hissy fit over not wanting to do the job for Bret. So they went with Plan B instead, which albeit ended up becoming the match of Austin's career. So, thanks, Shawn. Yeah, a lot of fun times ahead in the coming year, ladies and gents. There is a lot of shit that's about to go down between now and November of next year. I'll say one thing about 1996. Even though the WWF during that year was mostly lousy and the shows were boring beyond belief, the one thing people look back on historically with fond memories is seeing how the landscape of the business was changing, especially between November, December, leading into the new year. They had name-dropped Attitude several times during the show, and that was clearly the direction they were heading. They were necessary changes. And yeah, Vince was still relying way too heavily on the bad gimmicks. But just watching the timeline and the evolution of guys like Stone Cold, seeing the interaction between Bret and Shawn on TV, the product was starting to adapt. Or I should say, Vince was starting to finally adapt. And I remember much more about the WWF product in 97 than I do 96. 96 was mostly a blur because, I mean, let's be honest, not a ton of shit really happened when you boil it down. Beyond the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin, can you really name any other truly great, memorable stuff we saw in the last 12 months? I mean, the totality of Shawn's run as WWF champion was the focal point through so much of the build to WrestleMania 12. But once people saw through the BS that was the boyhood dream debacle, didn't take long for those people to finally turn on him. Once they recognized who Shawn really was. And it's why I've harped on the whole HBK main event run for the better part of the last 2 years. And Vince trying to force him on everyone as a babyface. Because I remember how disastrous that was. And when I go back and rewatch the entirety of his run as champion, It makes my judgment of him more valid and more reasonable. It's also why everything about Survivor Series 96 remains so iconic. When you see the way people vehemently turned on Shawn, that was 2 years of pent-up frustration. It's what 2 years of him on top led to. People finally had enough and said, fuck all this. Little did we know how crazy things were about to get in the coming year. Boy, howdy. But there you go. Return to form here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Not the best comeback show, but it was a show. So we'll leave it there. And like I said, we will have Retro Raw next week. And then once we kind of hit January, I'll kind of get this channel back into the flow of regular formatting. And we'll keep riding this horse until it dies. Can't make any promises of anything that's going to happen in the next 12 months, but I'll do my best to stay consistent here. It's a lot of fun doing this, and I'm still passionate about it to a degree. It's just timing and scheduling is everything. And boy, when my schedule gets packed, it is hard to do these shows. But anyway, thanks to everybody for coming to check out the show. Again, make sure you subscribe, comment, and come back to check out the show every week. I think it'll take a little bit of time for people to get back into the flow of things here, but we'll keep our fingers crossed for the new year. Anyway, take care all. Good to be back. Talk to you in a week. Peace out.